At the beginning of the 20th century, the science fiction author Herbert George Wells wrote the following in his political writings. If we want an efficient citizenship in a modern technology, then we need to teach them three things: reading, writing, and statistical thinking. That means a rational way to think about risks and uncertainties. How far have we got today, almost 100 years later? We've taught almost everyone reading and writing, but not statistical thinking. A weather forecaster in US TV once announced the weather that way. He said, "The chance that it will rain on Saturday is 50%. The chance it will rain on Sunday is also 50%. Therefore," he concluded, "the probability that it will rain on the weekend is 100%. Now we smile at that. But do you know what it means if you hear that there is tomorrow a 30% chance of rain? 30% of what? Now, we've done a study all around the world. Most Berliners believe a 30% chance of rain means that it will rain tomorrow in 30% of the time. That is 7 to 8 hours. Others believe it will rain tomorrow in 30% of the region. That is most likely not where I live. Most New Yorkers think both is nonsense. And it means that it will rain on 30% of the days for which this prediction has been made. That is, most likely, not at all. Here's a simple instance, what I will talk about. Our world is full with statistics, and we'll soon get to health statistics. And we think we understand, but most of the time, we don't understand. And, most important, the problem is not in the human mind, as many of my colleagues always try to convince you. The problem is in the communication of risk. In that case, how the meteorologists or the TV announcers communicate. They could say what they mean, and what they mean is that it will rain on 30% of the days for which this prediction has been made. People think in terms of classes, so they invent some class to that, and that may be days or region or time. And in principle, you can invent any class. For instance, one lady in Athens told us, "I know what a 30% chance of rain means. 3 meteorologists think it rains and 7 not." Okay, that was the introduction. Now we'll get serious. Now let's go to healthcare. And what I will do today with you is I will give you a number of exactly 3 principles that confuse people, and 3 principles how you can turn this confusion into insight. None of this is taught in medical school, and this is why most doctors are innumerate. I will give you the evidence for this claim. Let me first give a simple example illustration how the lack of statistical understanding goes together with deep emotions, here anxiety and fear, and then with actual costs in the healthcare system. Great Britain has many great traditions. One of them is the contraceptive pill scare. The most famous one went this way. The news reported that women who take the 3rd generation pill increase their risk of a thromboemboli by 100%. That's certain, isn't it? Now, many British women reacted with fear, panicked, dropped the pill, which led to unwanted pregnancies and abortions. What did the study show on which these news were based? Now, it showed that out of every 7,000 British women who took the previous generation pill, 1 had a thrombosis, and out of every 7,000 who took the new generation pill, it increased from 1 to 2. This is 100%. This is called a relative risk increase. It's the same as 1 in 7,000. That's called an absolute risk increase. The simple difference between relative risk and absolute risk is not known, still not known to the general public, and also not known to every doctor. This single news in the media caused an additional 13,000 abortions in the following year, just as an illustration. And the point is here, it's not that the British would have learned the difference now between the relative and absolute risk. This is going on since decades. What happens is that women lost the trust in the pill, and the stocks of sharing fell. That's an illustration. What I will do today is the following. That's my title. I will talk about the general claim, efficient healthcare requires informed doctors and transparent information. We have neither. The problem is that most physicians and patients do not understand health statistics. The causes are many. Here are three I will talk about. The failure of medical schools all across the world to teach statistical thinking. Second, biased reporting in patient pamphlets and the internet and other sources. Biased reporting would mean, in this example, that we report the relative risk because they're frightening and not transparently the absolute risks. And finally, lack of understanding of the general public in understanding evidence. And then you have the patient side. Put this together, you have collective statistical illiteracy. What's the solution? There are two which I'll talk about. Teach risk literacy in medical school. And I'll give you some examples how one could teach that. We work with the Charité to change their curriculum, but in general, universities are very slow to change. There's an old saying, to change a university is like moving a cemetery. And finally, transparent communication to the public. This is also, most of the time, information about benefits, about harms, are not communicated in a transparent way. I'll give you the examples. So let's start with three types of statistics. I will talk first about 5-year survival rates and mortality rates in the context of screening. Always, what you see first on the top is the misleading statistic that misleads you without noticing. Of course, this is a very smart audience here. You will notice almost everything, but I hope there are some of you who not notice immediately everything. And the second way is the way you can honestly and transparently communicate it. So let's start. When he was still running for president, Rudy Giuliani said the following: I had prostate cancer and I was saved. Thanks God, he was living in the US, where the chances of surviving are 82%, compared to the UK, where the chances are only 44%. And then the bad word is coming, socialized medicine. That's what we have in Germany too, and we do very well, by the way. So, but 82 is more than 44, isn't it? And so it's better to live in New York than in York. So it seems. Now, the point is, if you look at the statistics at the time, you find that the mortality rates in the UK and the US are basically exactly the same. How can it be that the survival rates are bigger? Now, there are two reasons. The first is called lead time bias. What you see here is a group of men who don't go screening. Say that's the British, they're not pushed as much as the Americans. And here's a group that goes screening. All of them have cancer and deadly cancer, and they all die at age 70, to make it simple. Those who don't go screening, it will detect it very late, say age 67, and they die at age 70. What's the 5-year survival rate? 0. Now the same group, or here the Americans, go screening, it's detected early, say at age 60, they die at age 70. What's the 5-year survival rate? 100%. Survival goes in that direction. See this? Not in the other one. That's the first reason. The second one is called overdiagnosis. Here are men without screening, 1,000 with progressive prostate cancer. 5 years later, 44% are still alive. That's the 5-year survival rate. And we have here another group who participates in screening, and screening not only detects progressive prostate cancers, but many more, which are non-progressive or slow-growing. You die with this, not from them. You die with these cancers. And that's what most of us men can hope for, to die with the prostate cancer. Because if you get old, that means you will get most likely prostate cancer. Among the 80-year-olds, 80% have some form of prostate cancer. That's what you're looking for, not being frightened. But that's not what you're told. Okay, so now think a moment about the calculation. Now we have this extra 2,000. They factor into the equation, and now that blows up to 81%. That's basically Giuliani's numbers and his facts. See that? The number is so big because you have all these guys who would better not take the test. And these are those who later end up with incontinent, thinking that the test saved their life. So just have to change that because the battery ran out. Okay, these are the two reasons why 5-year survival rates are misleading in the context of screening. Actually, the correlation between changes in survival rate, like Giuliani's 82 or differences in 44, and differences in mortality rates is correlated by 0.0. Okay. Now, the problem is that these facts are not openly communicated. So here is one of the most respected cancer centers in the US, MD Anderson. And what you see here is they advertise, sorry, that's the wrong thing, an increase in survival rates compared to the national non-increase, but not of survival, of mortality. That's double tonguing. You compare survival rates, which by definition increase if you do more screening, with the national-wide mortality rates, which don't decrease. And then in the text, this increase is attributed to therapy and surgery, which is misleading. And what you generate is confusion about progress against cancer and unwarranted enthusiasm. You may remember that the discoverer of PSA, Ablin, 2 years ago in the New York Times said that what happened to his test is a commercial fraud. Okay? Those among you who are American may be more unhappy about what I'm saying, but because that's the greatest country of brainwashing in terms of PSA. But it's also starting in other countries. Yeah? Okay. Do American physicians understand 5-year survival rates in the context of screening? We did the first study in the US with a nationally representative study of more than 400 primary care physicians. And among others, we asked, which proves that a cancer screening test saves lives? and we gave them the numbers of actual PSA screening studies, and we used the only study that is basically in favor of PSA tests, but we didn't mention that this is about prostate cancer, just to eliminate any a priori things. We just gave them the numbers. So the first was screen-detected cancers have better 5-year survival. That's exactly Giuliani's misbelief. And 76% of US physicians think that proves that screening tests saves lives. That's a big error, as we just have seen. Second, more cancers are detected in screening population. Now, every screening test with any use will detect more cancers. That's no proof that any lives are saved. But almost half of the doctors believe that would be a proof. The others do not. And finally, mortality rates are lower among screened persons. That's the only evidence that counts, and that I understand. But look, that basically that's almost the same number, and they seem not to differentiate between mortality rates and survival rates. And when we directly tested that, where we gave them the information about the same study in survival rates versus mortality rates, with survival rates, 83% thought that the mortality benefit is large, and with mortality rates, same data, only 28%. What can we conclude from that? Most doctors in the US do not understand the meaning of a 5-year survival rate in screening. And they will recommend the tests to patients if you give them in this way, and they will not recommend if you give them the numbers in another way. Medical schools fail. Is it better in Germany? We did a similar study in Germany with, this is not a random sample, this was a convenient sample of 65 physicians, and you basically get the same result. When the information was in survival rates, almost all judged the screening as effective, and even the difference was even larger than in Germany. We asked the Germans also about whether they know what the lead time bias is. 2 out of 65 knew. And what overdiagnosis contributes here, nobody knew. That's the situation. Okay. How could one communicate the benefits and harms of a treatment in a transparent way? That means here I take prostate cancer screening again as an example, without using 5-year survival rates, which are misleading, without using relative risks, which are also misleading. And one of the ideas is the so-called fact box that was featured by Voloshin and Schwartz. And here's a fact box that our Harding Center for Risk Literacy constructed for prostate cancer screening. How does a fact book work? The 2 alternatives, no screening, screening, next to next, so that every doctor and patient can see and compare. And the 2 major questions, what's the benefit, what's the harm? And that is, this is due to the translation from Macintosh to PC, so that's not here. This means prostate cancer mortality. And what do you see? Total mortality, and this is a review of all available studies, more than 200,000 men. 200, there's no life saved from PSA tests. Prostate cancer-specific mortality is, of course, smaller, and it's 7 to 8 here, and it's 7 to 8 there. Not even prostate cancer-specific mortality here. What's the harms? None, by definition, but about 150 to 200 out of every 1,000 will get false positives and unnecessary biopsies, and those here are really hurt. Sorry. It's eager to move forward, this machine. Because these are men who have non-progressive cancer, it's detected and treated. And between 10 and 30 of them will be incontinent and impotent or one of these for the rest of their life. That's the situation. Okay, let me summarize. One health statistic that's very important to understand any kind of screening is the difference between survival rates and mortality rates. And it would be very easy to teach every doctor this difference, but we are not as far. Second, out of 3 examples, that's all what I do with you today. Conditional probabilities confuse the minds of most doctors. Natural frequencies, a technique we developed, help you to see inside. Okay, would you like to experience this yourself? What I do now, I try to confuse you. And then I will show you how to turn this into insight. Ready? Assume you do mammography screening. And here's a woman who just tested positive. And she wants to know from you, doctor, do I now have breast cancer, or what's the chance? 99, 90, 50, less, more? Tell me, that I know how I should sleep this night. So I give you now the information in the way medical textbook teach it. And I hope it will have the effect, namely cloud your minds. Okay? So, what do you know? We make it simple numbers. The chance that a woman in this group has breast cancer is 1%. Second, if she has breast cancer, the probability that she will test positive is 90%. Third, if she doesn't have breast cancer, the probability that she nevertheless tests positive is 9%. So you have a prevalence of 1%, a sensitivity of 90%, and a false positive rate of 9%. What do you tell this woman? What's her chance that she really has cancer after testing positive? If your mind is now clouded, that's what I want. Okay? And it's not your mind that's clouded, but I show you, this is one study. I have done continuing medical education with more than 1,000 gynecologists. This is a bunch of 160. And I gave them just the same problem. And that's something they should know. And these were the 4 alternatives. I gave them like 1 out of 100 is the chance that she has breast cancer, 10 out of 100, 81 out of 100, 90 of 100. And if you just look at that, at the variability that you see, the failure of the education. Again, these are not urologists, these are gynecologists. And most of them think it's 9 out of 10 or 8 out of 10, it's likely. The reason why I took 81 is because in earlier studies, we have noticed that some physicians in desperation take the sensitivity, 90%, and deduct the false positive rate, 9%. They get 81. What should you do? Okay, that's so far. Now, your minds still should be clouded, I hope so. Now I'll show you a simple technique that you can understand that. And that's called natural frequencies. You forget all these probabilities. And the sensitivities is a conditional probability. Think about a concrete number of women. I make it very simply. Just think about 100. We expect that one of them has cancer, and she likely tests positive. And out of the 99 who do not have cancer, we expect another 9 to test positive. So we have 10 who test positive. Question, how many of those 10 do actually have cancer? Now, you see it, It's 1 out of 10. So it's that here. But out of these, you would expect 25% by chance. They're not even making that. When I teach them to use natural frequencies at the end of the session, most of them, you see, now can do this translation in their minds. Just let me think about 100, let me think about 1,000, and make it down. There are a few hopeless cases up there, but you have to live with them. And it's just an hour or so. I'll show you why this works. What you see here is the natural frequency tree. This is now the actual information. I made it a little bit more simple for you from the available evidence. And here you see the confusing probabilities. We had 1%, we had 90, we had 9%, just to make it easier and not a calculation exit. The point is the following: when you use this information, the sensitivity, the false positive rate, the so-called Bayesian calculations that you would have to do to calculate the probability of the disease given positive, yeah, is that. That's why your minds were clouded. And if you look at the natural frequencies, then the entire calculation simplified. That corresponds to the 1 out of 10. Yeah? What you see here is physicians are not the only one who are confused. We have studied judges and professors of law. They have the same problem. There is a murder and there's DNA evidence and nothing is certain in this world except death and taxes. If they get the information in probabilities, very few of them see through what the evidence means, and with natural frequency it scales up. The same holds for students, scaled down, and also unlike in medicine, there needs to be a verdict, guilty or not being made, and what you see is if the professionals are confused and they don't notice usually, then they more often say guilty. Okay. So that was the second part, and now the last part. And I'll just use here relative risk versus absolute risks. Here's an illustration about direct-to-consumer advertising, which is basically made in order to, of course, to influence people. And what Lipitor here is said to do is it reduced the risk of stroke by 48%. That's good, isn't it? 48%. So that means that out of 100 men, or men and women, 48 will not have a stroke. Or does it mean something else? Again, we have a relative risk reduction here, which doesn't give us the base rate. If you look up the original article, you will find the reduction is from 2.8 people in 100 to 1.5, roughly 1 in 100. That's the 48%. Okay? That means 99 people who take Lipitor have no gain. Clear? Of course, the industry has little interest to say that, because relative risks are more impressive, like they were in the initial example, more exciting. The deception by using misleading statistics already begins in the top medical journals. That was news to me until maybe 5 years ago. For instance, what we call mismatch framing is the following technique of double-tonguing. You report about a treatment, and then you report the benefits in a different currency as the harms. How would you report the benefits? In relative risks or in absolute risks? In relative, bigger number. And the harms? In absolute risks. Yeah? Yeah? That's not exactly what one expects from an honest reporting. The interesting thing is that studies show that this type of double-tonguing is used in 1 out of every 3 articles in British Medical Journal, JAMA, and The Lancet in this time. I have argued that the editors are responsible to stop that, to confuse the doctors. But the editors really need to take this ethical responsibility, and we'll see. Here is just another illustration how you can make clear and transparent information, this time about breast cancer screening. It's again the so-called fact box. Take the 2 alternatives next to next, no screening, go screening, and this is the Cochrane database review, and roughly what you get the following. What's the benefit? Total cancer mortality is the same, so there's no life saved. Breast cancer mortality, there is a difference, 5 against 4, but remember that person dies from another type of cancer. And here are the harms. False positives, unnecessary biopsies that will hit many women, and unnecessary treatment, that means non-progressive cancers. That would be a way. This type of fact boxes should be in every doctor's office. They should be made clear, and they allow people to make up their own minds rather than to be misled. Does the public understand the benefit? I show you one excerpt from the first European-wide study that we have done, and we have asked 10,000 people in 9 countries, representative studies, among others, about the benefit of mammography screening. And here's the question, and the best answer is, as you know here, 1 out of 1,000. And we scaled the other answers an order of magnitude away that it's not about 1 versus 2 or 3. Huh? And what do you see? That's Germany. There were 9 countries. Less than 1% of the German women understand the benefit. That means if you add this together, about 98% overestimate the benefit by 10-fold, 100-fold more, or don't know. That's not chance. This is the result of systematic misleading the public. And breast cancer screening is something that is talked all the time about. And that means in Germany, there is, and also the doctors, if you think that all doctors understand the benefit, here, no. So informed decision-making on cancer screening is basically not possible. I'll just show you one other country, the UK. Do you think the British are better informed? Who thinks so? Nobody. Worse informed? That's hardly possible. Huh? So, you see here, 100% more British understand the benefit. But that's, almost 2% here. And you see this huge overestimation here. They think that 200 women out of 1,000 who go are saved. And that's probably the typical relative risk degrees. What you just saw from 5 or 4 is communicated not as 1 in 1,000, but as 20%. And I think it's that. Okay. Can we do anything about that? Yes. What you see here is just an example from Germany. This is one of the most influential cancer care societies in Germany, and they have had brochures for every kind of cancer using the same thing as everywhere in the world, 5-year survival rates, relative risk, and be silent about the harms. That's how we treat women, basically. Yeah? Paternalism, tell them what they should do. Yeah? I'm giving many talks to medical societies, and how do you catch them? Yeah? By reputation. And I'm saying on TV, on radio, in public, that they're on their way to lose the trust of the public. I wasn't sure whether that's really true, because I don't know how much influence I have. Yeah? But they believed it. And I offered them that we help them to rewrite the brochures, and that has happened. Now in Germany, we have an entire generation of new information brochures where you see the benefits in clear terms, no 5-year survival, no relatives, and the harms also in numbers, and every woman or man can make his or her mind. That's the first step to medicine that really respects the patient. So let me summarize. I was talking about 3 ways to confuse people, 5-year survival rates, in the context of screening. There are contexts where it's a reasonable statistics. Stop it. Report mortality rates. Conditional probabilities like sensitivities and specificities, use natural frequencies, or relative risk, forget it, use absolute risk or number needed to treat, which is the inverse of that. So that's the last thing. And if you photograph this, maybe better than photographing, just read that book. and you get this. What's the problem? When we talk about medicine, we mostly talk about new technologies or better organization, bureaucracies. The one thing we lose in our field of vision is the physician and the patient. And the problem is that most physicians and patients do not understand health statistics. Now I give you the evidence for that. It's actually not just most patients, but also most physicians, even when it's on their own field. And the solution is two, teach risk literacy in medical school. Change your curriculum and continue, and also in continuing medical education. And that's some ways, some simple ways. Every student can understand that. And the second one is have the courage and the moral responsibility to introduce transparent risk communication about benefits and harms in journals and health brochures. Thank you for your attention.